Welcome to the second session of Awaken the Gifts from Your Ancestors. The topic today is revitalizing the gifts from our ancestors, or revivifying the gifts from our ancestors. Last week, we were talking about an overview. We spent the session on an overview, paying attention to both the gifts and the burdens we have from our ancestors, the gifts and the disempowerments from our ancestors. And so, but we did a meditation where we started to build a sense of the gifts from our ancestors as resources to help us in this journey of exploration. And the basic principle is that if we have powerful ancestral resources, people from our ancestors or ancestral memories from our supporting us and empowering us, that will create a creative state, a generative state, in which we can then hold the space to look at the disempowering beliefs and any disempowering messages we got from our ancestors in the past. And so this session as well is about that process of building more empowerment, building more resources from our ancestors, so that in the next session, we can spend time bringing healing and empowering energy to looking at anything difficult that we got from our ancestors. And also during last session, we looked at how we could have inner guardians to keep us safe on this journey of exploration. So that when we're looking at difficulty, it's no point in just falling into the difficulty, particularly if you've got trauma. There's no point in falling into the trauma, because that just re-traumatizes yourself. What you need to be able to do, what we need to be able to do, is to look at the difficulty, to look at the trauma, to bring resources to it, to taste just a little bit in our bodies, some of that trauma, but only to the extent that we can bring resources to it. And so it's called titration. You taste one little bit at a time. And I just have to say that this course is not for people who are highly traumatized. If you're highly traumatized, you will need professional support. We're not providing the level of holding and support in this workshop that would be needed if you had really strong trauma, and therefore this is psychoeducation rather than psychotherapy. So next week we're going to focus on healing the transgenerational disempowerments and traumas. So if you have difficulty in your personal development, you've worked on stuff, but you haven't been able to change it, it may be because you're carrying something from your ancestors that you haven't really looked at yet, some disempowering messages. And it could be through just contact with your parents and the contact they had with their parents, but it can even be genetic as well, although those genetic messages can be changed as well. And then, so that's the 9th of February. On the 16th of February, Celine Kumin Vega, who's a great practitioner and coach and friend of mine, will be hosted by Akeem, and she will run a session on what if you don't know your ancestors or have a feeling but don't know where it comes from. Of course, if you're adopted, you may not know who your ancestors are, and sometimes we have feelings, difficult feelings, that come before we really have memory, perhaps before the first 3 years of life, or from the womb. We don't know where it comes from. And so how do we work with those sorts of feelings or ancestors that we can't remember? And even for someone like me, where I can get I can get a family tree of pretty much all of my ancestors going quite a long way back, I don't actually know much about them. I don't know what the messages are at a conscious level that I've received from those ancestors. So particularly in that session, Celine will help you work with, what if you don't know what the messages are? What if you don't know what the disempowerments are? What if you don't know where they come from? Then on the 23rd of February, in that session, we'll work on healing collective shadows. So what are collective shadows? Collective shadows are things in the culture, elements of our culture, of our social culture, of our national culture, of our European and Western culture that are unconscious. For example, it used to be the case that people were very unconscious of the effect on women of patriarchy. And that's something that we're much more conscious about. It isn't completely sorted yet. There are still not as many women on the boards of companies as there are men. And there are lots of other examples of patriarchy. Just the other day, Sophie, my partner, had someone come and look at the garden to look at foxes and how to get rid of foxes from the garden. And as soon as I arrived, he stopped talking to her and started talking to me. And I had to say to him, she's in charge of this project. Of course, there's racism, and there's also the unconscious privilege of white people. As white people, we have different experiences of society, both education, employment, dealing with the police and the justice system, that is different to that of Black people. And where many of us are really unaware of that we get treated differently. And then, of course, there's the unconscious shadows of underprivileged white people. There's homophobia. There's the effects of the class system. And so those are collective shadows that will impact us in many different ways. And I will, talk about, that workshop on the 23rd of February is about really addressing those issues. And then the final session is an integration session. So 2 key points for today. The first is that we're focusing on our own lineages and what the empowering and disempowering messages that we've got from our own lineages, rather than particularly from the cultural messages, the cultural shadows that affect us. It's psychoeducational, it's not psychotherapy. Only go as deep into a difficulty as you can keep resourceful. It's one sip at a time. And we will spend time today on guardians, making sure that we have a good inner sense of what is enough of a taste of something that comes back. Because next session, sometimes people aren't even aware of trauma that was experienced by their grandparents. You may not even be aware of it, or you may be only cognitively aware of it. So when you feel into it, you just want to feel into it a little bit and step back, feel into it a little bit and step back. So today's session is about revivifying, revitalizing, remembering, accessing, becoming more conscious of the gifts that we have from our ancestors, to start with the stuff that's going to be a positive resource for us. And if I look at my own family, it's very, very touching, because so, for example, my father was an alcoholic who went bankrupt, really through his own fault, to be quite honest. He got some crooks into his business, but he should have known better. And spent a long time feeling sorry for himself. And, he wasn't a good role model as a father in many different ways. So, but what were the gifts that I got from him? What were the gifts that I got from that lineage? Well, one of the most beautiful things that I remember from my childhood was when I went to school. Before I went to school, he got a book about Charles Darwin and the theory of evolution with pictures in it, a picture book about the theory of evolution. And he sat me down and he said, when you go to school, they're going to teach you about the Bible. And I want to just teach you today that grown-ups don't agree about how the world was created. And I want to give you an alternative view to the Old Testament. And so then he took me through this picture book of the theory of evolution. And that was I was, 5 at the time. This was absolutely mind-blowing for me, the idea that not all grown-ups agreed with each other. And then when I became an adult and I studied Gregory Bateson, who was the mentor to the founders of NLP, he was saying exactly the same thing, that wisdom is to have multiple points of view within a system. If you have one point of view, it's fundamentalism. And in a complex system, wisdom is taking many different points of view within that system. that has been such an important wisdom in my life. And the person who introduced it to me was my father. So that's an example of a gift from that particular lineage. My father was also really tender and soft-hearted and warm, and he never tried to do the alpha male thing. He wasn't macho in any way. I've got quite a lot of that myself. I've got quite a lot of that soft male quality that he has, and I'm so grateful to have that from him. And as I was thinking about it today, I realized that his father probably had it. And there's not much known about his father. His father was really overshadowed by his wife, Maud Russell, she was half German and half Jewish, but very, very sharp in intellect. And actually, I think quite mean to her children, which is why my father and his brother were damaged. But and I could just imagine her having had difficult upbringing from her parents, marrying this soft-hearted man, just in the same way my mother married my father, who was a soft-hearted man. And staying with my father's lineage, his mother, there's so much that I could tell you about her. But the thing that was really most powerful for me was that from quite an early age, she treated me as an adult. And she was very grand. She had a large country house and she was wealthy. And I remember going for the weekend to stay at her house, and there were other, authors, and there was a painter staying, various interesting people staying. And, the very old-fashioned English thing, at the end of dinner, the women go and powder their noses, and the men stay behind and drink brandy. So my grandmother kept to the custom and said to me, she'd put me at the head of the table, and she'd said to me, you're the head of the table, you will stay and drink brandy with the men, but come through quickly. We weren't going to be allowed to be off for too long on our own. But there were quite a number of different ways that she treated me as an adult, and with respect at quite an early age. So that's a gift from my ancestor. On my mother's side, my mother had post-traumatic stress from the Second World War, but she wasn't good at loving, but she was really good at adventure. She was really good at driving cars fast. She was really good at saying, let's get in the car and drive to Italy. So, I have many memories of going to, really interesting places. And, in the summer, I could go out, we lived in London, but I could go out on the street. And as long as I was back by dark, that was fine. There was lots of permission that I had from her that's been really valuable in my life. And there's a part of me that I feel quite mixed about that comes through her lineage as well, which is the military part. There were all these famous military ancestors, and she herself was, she won medals in the front line during the Second World War as an ambulance driver. And, I feel mixed about that. But there is a part of me that when the going gets tough, I get going. I can handle tough situations. I'm good in emergencies. And so there are some really good qualities that I've got from her and that lineage. So you have your biological lineages. There are some other things that I've got from the Russells, which are, liberal, helping women get the vote in England, intellectual, thoughtful, some other great things from those lineages. I want to talk for a minute about and to invite you to think about your spiritual and psychological lineages as opposed to your, genetic ancestors. Where I'm in the lineage of my Buddhist teacher, who taught me personally one-to-one, who, created many powerful personal experiences for me, who really saw me, who let me walk into his kitchen anytime he wanted, who, when he was ill, would want to have me around. Once he was so ill, his lungs were filling with liquid, and he couldn't sleep lying down because he'd start to feel like he was drowning. And so he fell asleep with his face leaning into my hands. So I have this very powerful lineage from him. I have a very powerful lineage from someone when I was quite young and spiritual, and there was a lot of New Age stuff going on. Someone called John Sinclair, who was a part of something called the Lucis Trust, which was something similar to the Theosophical movement. It came out of the Theosophical movement. And I remember once it felt to me in a particular, there was someone who had pretty dark energy who I felt psychically attacked by. You know, I wouldn't describe it that way anymore. And he sat me down and he taught me to go beyond, to meditate beyond good and evil, to find the place that's beyond good and evil. I mean, that's such a great way to deal with dark energy, isn't it? To go beyond, to go to the place that's beyond good and evil. My Aikido teacher, Andy Hathaway, who I studied for about 15 years with, 2 or 3 times a week, you know, really helped me and was really kind and generous about my slightly awkward, you know, I'm slightly out of my body. I'm slightly awkward physically. My mentor, Colin Harrison, who has been teaching me for 20 years about awakening in the body. And there are many other mentors I have. Someone when I did NLP training in the first year, Dr. Harvey Carmen, a sort of famous psychologist, said to me, "You should become an NLP trainer." And actually, he didn't wait for me to do something about it. He actually contacted the trainer and said, "Julian wants to be an NLP trainer." So I became a trainer in the early 1980s. So there, you know, and then I had bosses as well who really mentored me. So the reason for mentioning this is that you've not only got all the gifts from your genetic lineages, but you've also got the gifts from the people who've seen you and believed in you and mentored you. And it's really worth doing some excavation. I am going to do some more research on my family. There's quite a lot written about the family. I've always ignored it. I've always wanted to be my own person. You know, old-fashioned English family, you know, the English side, and then the sort of the complicated mix of German and Jewish, you know, I've just avoided that most of my life. Now I'm going to do some more research on it. And what about the Irish branch? What do I get from the Irish branch? So I'm going to do some more research on it, but it's also really important to remember the other lineages, which in some ways are, I was going to say more important, I would say just as important, the spiritual and psychological lineages. But really in this session, I want us to start taking on board, you know, many of us, many people here have, their ancestors had a really hard time. And you've come to a better place in the world in the late 20th and 21st century. And you've gone beyond what was possible for your ancestors. But there still may be gifts that you have, things that you learned that are really worth acknowledging and paying attention to. For those of you who saw the newsletter this weekend, it had a picture of Belonda and her African grandmother, who was very, very powerful. The African grandmother was a really powerful woman, but Belonda has really sort of moved away from that. But once she gave me permission to use the photo, she sort of felt a sort of blessing coming back by acknowledging her ancestor. More of the blessing from that ancestor came back to her. So I think there's something really powerful about, you know, those traditions where the ancestors are treated with respect. But we can add the psychological, you know, the things that we understand psychologically, which is let's take the empowerments, let's transform the disempowerments. So today is about taking the empowerments. I want to just talk for a moment about the inner guardians in this work, which is that just in case you have severe trauma in your ancestral history, have some inner guardians. And so during the meditation today, I will also evoke your inner guardians. And I see them being like it's sort of like your inner James Bonds or your inner Jane Bond, or whatever, your cool protectors, your bodyguards, sort of psychological bodyguards. And they might be people people who will watch over your shoulder and make sure that you don't get into anything that's too difficult. Or it could be some sort of archetypal form. As you know, I'm practice Tibetan Buddhism. They've got 1 million archetypal forms, at least 84,000 anyway, but I've never actually counted them. Archetypal forms that protect you. And some of them, really sort of beautiful. There's one called the lion-headed Dakini. So that's a woman with a lion's head. And the reason she has a lion's head, or perhaps not the reason, but the image of the lion's head is the mother lion who will be totally fierce, protecting her children. So then you have, a lion protecting you. If anything happens, you can play in the psychological playground, but if it gets too rough, they'll pull you out. And I've also got my own Buddhist teacher as well, who acts as a protector for me. And I think it's great to invite spiritual forces. If you have a spiritual connection, everybody has a spiritual connection, but if you've developed your spiritual connection, you can't not have a spiritual connection, because spirituality means feeling a connection with the universe. And you're all living in the universe as far as I can tell. Therefore, you have a connection with the universe. The only question is, have you lent into that connection? If you haven't, that's absolutely fine. You can use psychological resources as protectors. But if you have lent into that connection, then you may have archetypal images or forms or ways of just inviting that support as we do this work. Because one of the things about particularly the transgenerational trauma is that you may not be aware of it. We're not really educated to think about it. When I grew up, in my generation, we all got out of home as quickly as we can, moved away from our parents, and behaved in ways that were completely unacceptable to our parents. I was brought up at the end of the hippie period, the early 1970s. We're all fiercely independent. And so, you may not, have as much support and resource supporting you from your ancestors as people in other parts of the world might have. So before we go into a meditation on this, any questions that you want to ask? And Alex, I know your camera's off because you have a bad line, so you're welcome. Any questions before we go into a meditation? Here's a question for you. From the first session, if you were at the first session, how much of a sense do you have of those resources? Because we did invoke positive resources at the first session. Have you got, half a dozen ancestors, whether it's genetic or psychological, spiritual lineages? Have you got half a dozen of those hanging around? Or maybe you don't need half a dozen because you've got, Jesus sitting at the end of your bed, or the Buddha. Any questions about?
Yeah. I have difficulty with protectors of whatever, because I can do some Jesus and Buddha and stuff, and there's a nun from school I can do, but I find these negative thoughts, as soon as I've got something positive, I suddenly will think something negative about that.
About that what?
That person or that thing, that protector, that guardian.
Yeah.
I think that actually, no, there's that, that sort of.
Do you have a bit of a negative voice anyway, inner voice?
Can do.
Yeah.
Do
you have negative thoughts about the Buddha, Georgianne?
No.
So, okay, so there you are. There you go.
But yes, no, nor Jesus.
Great, so that's two.
Yeah, exactly, but they're quite remote.
Well, bring them closer. So, so here's a good point for people. You imagine sort of Jesus off in the sky somewhere. Bring him into the, or Buddha, or Mother Earth, or, Abraham. Sorry, can I just talk for a moment, Georgianne, please? Or I'm talking to everyone. You know, or Muhammad, or Abraham, or you know, the forest from African traditions, or you know, whatever it is. Bring them into the room. Bring them close. You know, have Jesus sit at the end of the table. Have Buddha sit at the end of the table. I have an intimate personal relationship with the founder, well, with Mary Magdalene, and also the wife of the founder of Tibetan Buddhism. Why not? You know, so don't have them be remote. If you think about, I mean, does anybody object to me talking about Jesus? Because I know sometimes people do. Is anybody having a problem with that? Because actually the stories are quite familiar to many people. So I'm only using it as an example because if I use Buddhist stories, they won't be familiar to you. But there are so many stories where he heals, talks to, spends time with, encourages outcast people. You know, you know, or one of the examples, you know, how people are around, you know, have been traditionally, patriarchy's been around menstruation, you know. So one of the women has had, you know, probably some sort of, you know, pre-menopause bleeding for a very long time. She's been outcast by her, you know, the people around her because she's bleeding all the time. And she touches Jesus's coat because she has so much faith. And he knows someone's touched her. And when he finds out it's her, he blesses her. You know, he's however bad you are, he will hang out with you. You know, so, you know, feel that sort of energy. The same is true of all the traditions. Those archetypal forces of love, of connection, will. Tibetan Buddhism, one of the founders of one of the traditions was a murderer. You know, everybody can be transformed. So whatever you need for your transformation, bring it close into the room. This is more than just a talk at this session. It's a more general conversation. Build. And part of the trick is that you can't just sit back and wait for Buddha or Mother Earth or the saints or the archetypes or the woman of the forest or Mother Nature to come. You have to lean into it. You have to say, I'd like a date. Can I have a date? And one date isn't always enough. You know, you may not even hold hands on the first date. You know, you may just give a polite kiss on the cheek at the end of the first date. You need a few dates before you really get intimate. So it's like have a daily date with those archetypal forces that welcome you, that support you, that can welcome you. And if you feel, you know, that there are some terrible things about yourself that are hard to forgive, bow your head down and say, I need to be forgiven. You know, one of the things about life is that, you know, it's very often when we're very, very young, you know, some terrible things can happen. You know, or we can be wounded in a way. I'm someone who, you know, I'm so badly wounded. I've been really a bit of a bastard in some of my relationships earlier in life before I looked at myself. I mean, it was my fault, but it also was the way that I was wounded. So however much, you know, there are things that you feel guilty about, you can just say, actually, that is just my woundedness coming through. Bring your woundedness and lay it out in front of the archetypal forms. That's a sort of more general conversation. Thanks, Georgianne. Any other questions about bringing the powerful ancestors closer and also the archetypal, you know, so there's your biological ancestors, there's your spiritual and psychological people in whose lineages you are, your teachers and their teachers. You know, Milton Erickson I've never met him, but I'm in his lineage. And then there's archetypal forms, and also this particular class that I'm mentioning, which is those who can protect you or pull you back should you touch onto a trauma that's bigger than you can handle in a single session. Make sense? Any other questions about that? Anyone else got not too many? Yeah, go on, Marina. Anyone, after Marina, anyone else who's got not too many, or or insufficient resources, because it's important in this session to really, to have lots. So first Marina and then Patricia.
Julian, sorry, the camera's mucking around. It's just something that I do think sometimes that, when you say make a date with them, so I get the big picture and I understand at some level what you're talking about. But then when you say make a date and I hang out with them, isn't this just we're having a conversation in our own head, imagining what they might say to us?
Well, that's why a meditation, whether it's a sort of 4-3-2-1, Ericksonian type of meditation, or some other form of meditation is important, because you want to go from the place where it's all just being made up by your conscious mind. You want to get past that point. You want to get to the point where if it's being made up, at least it's being made up by your unconscious mind. That something appears out of nowhere and speaks to you. So if, we're in that deep meditation, if you ask Jesus a question, or Buddha a question, or Mother Earth a question, you'll get an answer back that doesn't seem like it's an answer from you. So one of the things about, so the idea that you are separate from the rest of humanity and the rest of Mother Nature is a fallacy that has been developed over the last couple of thousand years, probably. It's not true. Your unconscious is not yours. Your unconscious has information from your culture, from the cultures of the world, from your ancestors, from the biosphere. Every time you breathe, you prove that you are not separate from Mother Earth. We're not independent beings. Your unconscious is not yours. It's been informed at an unconscious level from before you were born. I don't know at what stage, the fertilized egg starts to pick stuff up from the outside. First it's picking up blood, but when does it start to pick up psychic type of stuff? I've got no idea. But you've been picking up stuff every moment of your life since the beginning, the beginning of time. So it's good to get beyond just having a conscious conversation. Hey, Jesus, how are you? Hey, I'm really well today. You want to get beyond that. But if you open your heart, you get into a deeply relaxed station, open your heart. I do this at night when I can't sleep. I talk to them.
It's more in the meditation state, isn't it? I think that's what you're going with. It's rather than, because it's still useful, isn't it? I might say to myself, well, what would Julian do in this? Or what would Steve Covey do? Consciously.
Yes.
But I think you're saying these, when you talk about Mother Teresa or the other ones, I think, so I think when you're saying if you're deeply meditating, that's the time that comes in.
Absolutely, yeah. There's all this stuff at the quantum level, the quantum particle that, that is in quantum entanglement when two particles in different places in the universe are connected with each other, moving at the same time. And we have a sort of, that mirror neuron stuff that we have, which is how we learn as children. We learn from our parents. We only learn a small amount from their words. We learn an awful lot from their behaviors. And we learn even more perhaps from their feelings, and we pick it all up, we digest it. We're not just learning at the cognitive level. So any of your mentors, you've got them inside you in a way that's unconscious, that you're not even consciously aware of. You've picked up things from them. With my Buddhist teacher, he was so careful not, he really made, this sounds like one of these sort of, people out of a storybook. It was really important for him not to talk about the really important things. He found lots of ways of not talking about the important things. The important things was communicated non-verbally, through energy, in your sleep, all of that. And that's what actually happens anyway. The really important things will be the things that are demonstrated or that you've picked up in your body. So that's the level that you're inviting in yourself, that's picked up all this information that you haven't been able to process consciously. Just one more thing, because this is important, Marina. The neuroscience now says that it's the right brain that experiences the world the left brain, our intellect, does not experience the world. Our left brain just makes maps of the world, of what the right brain experiences. And the left brain is useful for verbal communication. But what's happened is through the education system that realized that map making, that language, that categorizing, that science, that academia was really important, the left brain became so full of itself that it staged a palace revolution, a coup d'etat, and tried to take over and tried to, this famous book is called The Master and the Emissary. The right brain is the master. The left brain is the emissary, but the emissary has staged a coup d'etat, and now we think we are our left brain. We're not our left brain. It's just the part of us that that organizes stuff cognitively and makes maps and makes descriptions, but it's the right brain that experiences reality directly. So what we want to do is to get into a body-mind connected state where we can have access to all that information that's in the, has come through the right brain, to the unconscious, to the poetic, to the aesthetic side of our nature, and have access to that. And that includes information from our culture and from every culture of humanity, and through Mother Nature. There are so many things in nature. And in fact, even language, all the metaphors we have in our language are based on experiences of nature. It's, there's so much that we don't, we cannot understand with our conscious minds, because a painting or a feeling or an aesthetic, poetic representation, a painting is more than, describes more than 1,000 words. So that's what we have to get, that there's information available to us that is much more than our conscious minds and is much bigger and broader than our skin encapsulated ego. Does that make sense?
Yeah, brilliant. That's really helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. Patricia.
Hi there. I would be devoid of those important people and things like that, because I have not, I love that, but I have not developed that sort of thing that you're talking about.
So you're devoid of empowered people who are resources.
Mm-hmm. I would say so.
So have you ever had a boss that really was, really supported you?
No.
Okay. Was there ever a school teacher who ever really supported you?
Yes. last week.
And what was his or her name?
Well, her name was Mrs. Punt, would you believe?
So just take a moment to imagine Mrs. Punt and see her and maybe hear her voice as best as you can and feel how it feels having her as a resource. So that's one.
Okay.
Have you got any friends or mentors who you just say, oh, they were so kind to me when such and such happened?
Yeah.
There's a little bit of hesitation here. There is some archaeology for you to do here, Patricia.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever listened to my audio series?
No, I don't think so, no.
Because I do, there's a series called, it's called something like Building Self-Belief and Hope, which is all about building resources, which is free. It's just audios of these Zooms, so the quality isn't very good. And I'm often thinking on my feet. But the audio series, a series of meditations, you get the link in, it's in your newsletter that you get on the Saturday. You can find it in there. And it might be really worth doing a lot of audios. If my hypnotic meditations sort of work for you, doing these, but just to start really practicing and building. You've got Mrs. Pont. We got her very quickly. If I had time, I could spend another 10 minutes and we could find another 5. It's just a matter of doing the practice and starting to think about. And I don't know about you, Patricia, but some people, and I was one of them, I tend to remember all the times that I was neglected, or people didn't pay attention, or they weren't kind. And I'm not very, I haven't historically actually, but I am much better now, good at remembering the times when people were kind and supportive and empowering. And there's a sort of switch we have to turn in our brains, which can take some time, but actually, you know, it's just a matter of practice when we start to focus on the ones who were people who, and this is also good for you, Georgianne, focus on the ones who said yes to us and were kind and saw us, and not on the ones who didn't. And it doesn't even have to be someone who says yes to us all the time, because no one is perfect. But there are moments, you know, there's a friend that I've fallen out with a little bit, and perhaps we'll reconnect with again. But there were times when I could feel the palpableness of her belief in me and my potential. So it doesn't even have to be somebody got it right all the time. They got it right enough of the time. And, you know, and just to do that as a daily practice, to take time to think of people who supported you, to dig them out. It's like being, you know, either archaeology or a historian who's going through, you know, the library of your mind, the great library of your mind.
Okay.
Go back through your memories, pulling out, oh, there was somebody once who, you know, when I was doing NLP training, there was a millionaire on the same course who I set up a business with me. He was like a real sponsor when I was 22. Thank you, Angie. And you can, you know, take that link, or you can, it's in your chat, or you can just find it on the website. Great. Anything else before we go into the meditation?
Well, I just wanted to share that I've never thought of my ancestors in this way, and it's so empowering to do so.
Yeah.
And I have this lovely portrait of my grandmother and my great-grandmother in my hall, and now every time I look at it, I see something different.
Yeah.
And it's visceral. I can really sense it. I can really sense their presence and
that's beautiful.
Thank you for that.
Yeah, I mean, it's such a, you know, because there's so much going on unconsciously that we're not aware of, if we just look at a picture, we start to evoke stuff that's in the lineage. I think I first became aware of this really strongly with actually the negative stuff. You know, that I've got a friend who's they're Polish. They, you know, they were both in concentration camp. They came to England. They were very successful, but they were had been traumatized around health issues. And then the daughter has all this trauma around exactly the same stuff, and the granddaughter. You know, this stuff that it's sort of sometimes easier to see the negative stuff that's transmitted rather than the positive stuff. But today we're focusing on the positive stuff that's got transmitted, and you can just be poetic about it. You know, if you can imagine it, you can have it. You know, what is that slightly trite NLP saying? You know, what is it? Fake it until you make it. You know, it's sort of, but in one sense, like imagine it and you'll have more of it. Imagine it and you'll have more of it. Imagine the resources of your ancestors and you'll have more of it in your life. So let's do a meditation. And one of the reasons I do this, you know, sometimes I get bored with my own meditations, but you know, the 4-3-2-1 meditation from Betty Erickson is just such a simple thing. And one of the things I most like about it is that if you've listened to me doing it half a dozen times, you know, you can do it in your daily practice on your own. It's just so simple. And that's one of the reasons that I really like it. And always the first step for me is just to start paying attention to exactly what I can see, and then exactly what I can hear, and then just starting to pay attention to my body. So there's a whole lot more that I'm attending to than just my thoughts. And then it's just really nice to feel the present moment, particularly in my body, the solidity of my feet on the floor or wherever they are. You know, all that whirring thoughts, but there's a muscle in my foot. There are many muscles in my feet. I can pleasantly wonder about the muscles that wrap my toes. I don't know if I can feel the bones of my toes, or if I can feel the muscles and the skin. I can feel the hardness of the bones pressed against the muscles. Sometime I'd like to do a tender course where I would just intimately go through my anatomy, feeling all the different sensations in my body. And then it's really enjoyable just to feel how my toes are connected to the arch of my foot, my instep, and my heel, and the bones inside. And since we've started with feeling, let's pay attention to 3 other feelings in our body. The first could be a really interesting muscle, or to say it the other way, and a muscle that's interesting to you in this moment. And to find a place on your skin that interests you. And for those who are moving, every time you move, you get more comfortable. There's a settling down that can happen in the body. And then a fourth feeling, what's an emotion or some sensation between your throat and your pelvis. And then I can pay attention to 4 things that I hear. And actually, when I do this, I actually listen to 5 different things. Because I listen, can I hear anything outside the house? Can I hear any noises in the house? What can I hear in the room? You can hear my voice, Julian's voice. Can you hear your computer? Is there an echo? And then I listen for, what can I hear in my body? And then I can listen to my inner voice, the old friend, my inner voice, who I'm having a cup of tea with. And as usual, he or she is chatting away. And you don't really have to pay too much attention to the content. but you can get a general feeling for it without necessarily believing it or buying into it. It's a voice. It's only one part of your experience. Because you can hear so much more. You can feel so much more. And let's go to 4 things that you can see, whether it's with your eyes closed in your mind's eye or your eyes open in your optical eye. And even if your eyes are closed, you'll get the darkness of your eyelids and perhaps spots of light on your eyelids. And if your eyes are open, it's great to focus on one point in front of you and then soften your gaze so that you're seeing with your peripheral vision. And then notice for yourself, however you're doing it, 4 different things. And notice 3 things that you feel. And 3 things that you hear. And 3 things that you see. And 2 things that you feel. And 2 things that you hear. And 2 things that you feel. One thing that you feel. One thing that you hear. one thing that you see. And I'd like to invite you to think of someone who really believes in you, cares about you, believes in your potential. See their face, hear their voice, and feel how that feels. Someone like Mrs. Pont, the teacher. And then allow to come to mind someone else, either from your ancestral lineage who supports you, or from your psychological, spiritual tradition, academic tradition, lineage, your school, if you like. You can allow them to come to mind and enjoy their presence. You can welcome them, you can see them. And what words do they have of greeting for you? And how does that feel in your body? And then you can let others come to mind. People who are empowered. People who bring different qualities. People who'd be interested in supporting you and helping you grow and helping you develop from your ancestral lineage or from your spiritual or psychological lineages. And even perhaps people, archetypal forms or people that you've never met, you can't quite say that you're in their lineage, but you aspire to be. For me, that would include Mahatma Gandhi, Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela, for me, is my inspiration for dogged persistence over long periods of time. Lao Tzu comes to me. Who comes to you? Maybe there's a child who loves you in a way that makes you feel great about yourself. One of my mentors is a dog now deceased, who taught me how to roll in the grass in spring. Or a cat from my childhood. There were 4 children, and she would sleep in your bed every 4th night because she was fair with the other children. And just relaxing and allowing surprising thoughts and feelings to come to mind. A teacher you hadn't thought of. An interaction with an aunt or an uncle who you didn't know very well. The first person who told you a dirty joke. Mine was my mother. It was her coming of age gift to me. It doesn't matter if these figures come slowly or quickly. If you do this meditation frequently, not necessarily every day, each time you do it, they'll come more easily and quickly. You have to start somewhere. You start with 1, and then you get 2, and then you get 3. And before long, you might have 25. Most of the time, half a dozen is enough for me. But sometimes I imagine an outer circle around me. Other figures have appeared. A secretary who worked for me for 20 years, who was so faithful, cared about me, believed in me. A refugee from the Ukraine who was my cleaner, who told me once that I was her family. Let yourself be surprised by what comes to mind. And sometimes, rather like Christmas or Chinese New Year, when you're a kid, you know that presents are coming a month before, but they have to stay wrapped until Christmas Day or Christmas Eve or New Year's Day. There may be some supporters, ancestors, spiritual, psychological, or genetic lineage who haven't revealed themselves yet, but will appear on your birthday will appear in the next few days. Allow yourself to have that sense of excitement about what's to come. We're inviting the unconscious to start a process. The conscious mind invites the unconscious to start a process that only the unconscious can do. And then we allow the winds of our unconscious to draw people into the consciousness of our minds, into awareness, people's archetypal forces. And in your unconscious, in the unconscious, it can happen in really strange, different ways. In Japan, they get images of Jesus and Santa Claus all mixed up with each other. Maybe your archetypal form will come on a reindeer in a sled. And when you're ready, begin to reorientate to the group. Stay in a deeply connected state. But begin to reorientate to the group. See the screen. And I want you to share what you've got from the meditation. Groups of 3, it'll be 21 minutes in total. Groups of 3, 7 minutes per person. Groups of 4, 4 minutes, 5 minutes per person. And I will do the timing for the groups of 4. So the groups of 3, make sure that there is someone in your group to do the timing. Round 1 starts now. And the question is, what did I get from the meditation? What did I get? Who did I see? What did I feel? What did I get from the meditation? And for the other people in the group, don't give advice. If the person didn't experience very much, just say, you're not a problem to be solved. You're a mystery that's unfolding. Just say, it's all perfect. You're a mystery that's unfolding. It's all perfect that you're a mystery that's unfolding. 20 minutes, no advice, no intellectual talk. Talk soulfully. The listeners listen. And if someone's giving advice, can someone very politely say, hey, Julian asked us not to do that. 21 minutes starting now, and I will do the timing for the groups of 4, the groups of 3 time themselves. Welcome back, everyone. So we've got a bit of time to process what was going on and how that exercise for you and what came up for you. What came up for you? How was it for you? Great, Stephanie. You have to unmute, Stephanie.
Yes, sorry, I did that by accident, but I can say what was coming up for me. I'm in New York, and during the meditation, I was somewhat distracted by police activity here.
What, in your apartment?
Well, out there, you know,
Okay.
there were helicopters and God knows what. But what came up for me was, through your introduction and so on, I had an inner New Year's, Chinese New Year's party. And the first guests who showed up were my spiritual ancestors,
Right.
and my other ancestors' teachers. And then all of a sudden I noticed that actually my ancestors are also there. Not that I know them very well, but they were there. And they had a different quality. The spiritual ancestors and the teachers, they were all very light and colorful and cheerful and mingling and celebrating. And my ancestors, they were all, I couldn't recognize them. I only could sense them. And they were all black, dressed in black, like they sometimes were also in this black and white photography. And they were there. And I had the sense they were not exactly objecting, they were actually wondering and actually quite open. And I found that very interesting. Beautiful. Just to sit with that feeling of this inner party.
Yeah, and our ancestors want transformation as well. They were stuck in their stories of their time. And so actually it's great to heal the ancestors, even just as a metaphorical form. So that's great, Stephanie. Thank you. That's really a nice image. Yeah. Who else? Ahaya.
Hi. Actually, I always enjoy your sessions, Julian. What came to my mind during the meditation was my parents, my mother's side, who I've never met, and I always connect to nature. So I was circled sitting with my family around me, and I was surrounded by fire is one of my resources.
Right.
So I was circled with a circle of fire, but it was a serene kind of quiet and comfortable sitting.
Yeah, beautiful.
It was beautiful.
Do you have a dog, Haya?
I do. I'm sorry for the
That's one of your resources.
He is.
But one of the things I love about sharing is that, we inspire each other. Wouldn't it be great to have a circle of fire, or sometimes some people have it like their conscious mind is like a campfire, and they sit by the campfire, and then different figures come out of the darkness to greet them at the campfire. So just really having these different metaphors is just a beautiful thing. Thank you, Haya. That's great. What else? Esther, did you get your Siberian ancestors?
Well, I was focusing today on my spiritual mentors and archetypal figures.
Great. Okay, great. Well, sometime I'd love to hear about your Siberian ancestors. If they ever come, I'd love to hear about it. Do you want to say something about your spiritual mentors and archetypal figures? Or have I put you on the spot? I might have put you on the spot.
Well, it's a lot of rabbis that I met in Israel, and also rabbis that are dead, but whose books I read and whose graves I visited there.
Beautiful. Yeah, really beautiful. Such a good example. Yeah. What else? What else? Good things, bad things, difficulty, ease. Feeling uncomfortable. If you've got uncomfortable feelings, worth sharing those.
Well, I can tell you that I ended up feeling like you had introduced me to the treasure chest that I am.
Fantastic. Oh, I'm so happy. Thank you for that. That's good for me. I'll put that in my pocket. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah. I mean, it's so amazing, isn't it? We don't really think about this very much, but you think about how far back we go, to the primal sludge on planet Earth and the oceans of planet Earth. We go a long way back, just at a biological level. There's so much information there, encoded and encoded and encoded. So it's just such an amazing thing. Steve, some of you know Steve Gilligan, but when he goes to his Irish ancestors, he has to go back more than 1,000 years to find empowered ancestors. So sometimes we may have to go back a long way, and that's okay too, you know. So it's great. It is a treasure. It's a treasure chest. I'm only just exploring this for myself. As I've said, I always avoided my ancestors. Now I've got to, because I'm a product of my ancestors, I better include them, both the good and the difficult, you know. Thank you, Mary. That's nice. What else?
There's so much. I don't know where to start. Ask me a question.
That's your question. Well, your name has got lots of different components in it, hasn't it? Is that different ancestral lineages, or is that all? Is that marriage?
No, it is absolutely. I'm such a mixed bag of English, Irish, Dutch, South American. My family went out to, or my great-great-grandfather went out to South America in 1898.
Yes.
As a naturalist, and to discover the world. And
beautiful, wonderful.
And my father's Dutch, my mother is half English, half Irish. So lots of, and I you know, I gypsied around the world until I was 27, and then now I've settled in Amsterdam.
Yeah.
So lots of surprises also came up in the
Like what? Like what?
Well, like my history teacher. I was at boarding school and not very happy. But this particular teacher, she was actually called Mrs. Moody, but she was kind and gentle, and yeah, she believed in me. So that was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Beautiful thing. It's so nice when one gets those people that we didn't really remember properly, you know.
Yeah.
Yeah, include them, welcome them. You know, it's very, very easy for some people just to dismiss it when somebody's kind or compassionate or sees you or believes in you. And actually to go back and say, it may be 40 years later, but I want to say thank you now. I want to engage now. That's a great thing. Yeah. Thank you.
And then
go on.
No, well, what's particularly, but this also came up a while ago, but what is particular, my grandmother, who was a physiotherapist and was working with Alexander's technique, and she used to tell me as a child, all your answers are in the body. And it was only later in life when I started doing NLP, and you know, and I use it now in my practice, but it's all sort of coming together.
Yeah. So all of those memories, all of that's, the unconscious is in the body. I mean, that's where the unconscious is.
Yeah.
You know, and it's all stored in the muscle and, you know, in the genes and all of those different places. And so as we come into our bodies, all sorts of different things can come up. And so that's really beautiful. So is there anybody who had difficulty who needs to speak?
I had difficulty because I think I went to sleep in the meditation.
What's difficult?
Didn't wake up. I didn't wake up for the groups. So I missed all the groups. But I did have a really bad night last night because I managed to sprain my wrist and knee, and so I had a lot of pain last night. So maybe I just needed to. I just needed to sleep. Maybe my body was telling me to sleep.
It was perfect. Yeah. In the meditations, if you sleep, that's fine too. It all goes in. It all goes in. It's just that your conscious mind doesn't get to play with it so much. And if you're very addicted to your conscious mind, you may not like it if you slept through a meditation, but you can always listen to the audio if you want to, you know. It's actually, it still goes in. In some ways it's better because it goes in, and then suddenly you'll sort of wake up in the morning and you find yourself having breakfast with Buddha or Native American.
I mean, I'm lucky in that I do have quite a lot of what's the word? Not exactly conversations with my archetypes, but quite a lot of communication. Yeah. So maybe today I just needed to sleep. But I would have liked the breakout rooms. But it is what it is.
Yeah. Maybe tomorrow morning when you wake up in the morning, at some point have a cuddle with your ancestors.
My archetypes.
Wouldn't that be cool? With your lineages, I can imagine cuddling Gregory Bates, and that would be something. He's like a very
Yes.
tall British man, ill-fitting clothes. You
Yeah,
know.
wasn't he married to Margaret Mead?
He
at one
was,
point?
yeah.
Yeah. Mm,
At one point.
yeah.
You know, slightly awkward and shy. You know, it's sort of fun to
Yeah.
do these things.
Yeah,
Okay, so
exactly.
let's unmute ourselves. And oh, did you have a question, Stephanie, before we?
Yes. Do we get the recordings of the sessions?
Yeah, the recording is in the newsletter on the Saturday.
Okay, good.
So, because there's a little bit of editing that needs to happen, and so just the link comes out at 6 o'clock on the Saturday in the newsletter. Then that takes you to the page with all the different recordings,
Oh,
and then you can click on the one that you want.
thank you very much.
Sure, sure. Okay, so let's all unmute. How are you? And we've got a little 5 minutes. So, how are you feeling right now? A sentence would be great, and let's hear from everybody.
In great company of you and whoever we called in.
I feel immense.
Let Haya go. Let Haya go.
Sorry.
Then she can mute, and then we won't hear the dogs. Okay.
I just feel blessed and grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. Beautiful. Christy.
I feel immensely enriched and grateful. Thank you.
I feel sleepy and relaxed.
I feel connected to my roots.
Julian, I liked your analogy from NLP. Imagine it, and there will be more of it in your life.
Yeah.
I feel awed or in wonder.
I'm feeling at one.
I'm feeling full.
Full.
Like connected to a well.
Well, I'm grateful to be able to learn as well from the good as from the bad models.
I feel relaxed and a bit sleepy. I did sleep through most of it, Julian, but that 4-3-2-1, I use it a lot actually. If I wake up at night and I go straight back, but I love listening to the recordings, so I feel very grounded, and I'll enjoy the recording over the weekend. So thank you very much.
Sure.
And the group chat afterwards, it's just brilliant. It's just
Good.
lovely to be really heard with no distractions. Thank you.
I'm feeling good and tired, both.
Have you spoken, Patricia?
No, I'm trying to wonder what to say. I just feel as though I'm in the company of good friends.
Nice, beautiful. You are, hopefully. Anyone not shared? Nancy, have you shared?
I'm feeling nourished.
Nourished. Anyone else not shared? Great. So it's so lovely to have you here. I look forward to being with you next week. Lots of love to you all.
Maria, you are on mute. You're not sure. Maria, you're on mute. You say something, but
I am mute. Yes, yes. I feel grateful and powerful from the energy of my ancestors.
Great, beautiful. Thanks for noticing that, Gianrico. Thank you. Great. So see you all next week. Take care.